Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Tough Friends Collective podcast. I am your host, Chelsea Gomez, also known as Oh, You're So Tough. If this is your first time listening, just a quick intro to this podcast. We speak about cancer in real, authentic, candid ways. Many of the stories we discuss here come directly from my Instagram page, which is called Oh, You're So Tough. Recently, I asked the community on Instagram what they wanted me to talk about on the podcast, and one of you suggested grief tourism. And grief tourists are a huge part of a lot of our cancer experiences. So in this episode, we will talk about what is a grief tourist, give you some examples of grief tourism, and talk about what you can do to combat these sorts of interactions or people. Before we get too far into this episode, I just wanted to ask you, if you are enjoying this podcast, would you please leave me a nice rating, follow me, subscribe wherever you're listening to. I would greatly appreciate it. It does help a whole lot. I'm doing this podcast thing all on my own, so any support you can give me is truly, truly, truly appreciated. In the cancer community, the term grief tourist is usually used when talking about a person that shows up in your life after you're diagnosed. And this doesn't necessarily have to be just for cancer folks, but obviously that's what we're talking about here. But people who show up in your life and are the first ones to comment on your status about cancer, like, let me know if you need anything, thoughts and prayers, etc. But that person is not a person who is actually genuine behind their comments or their actions. Grief tourists are people who are attracted to tragic situations and maybe wanting to make themselves feel like they're doing something by commenting, let me know if you need anything, or they are unhappy in their own life. And so they are like, oh, here's a tragedy I can focus my energy on and see that my life isn't so bad. That is the most common type of grief tourist that I see in the cancer community and that I have experienced. Most of these people, as I said, if you really need something from them, if you were to really take them up on that, let me know if you need anything offer, they're not going to be there. There's also grief tourists that are very performative in person as well. So I have heard many different stories about people coming to, let's say, a 5K for cancer and coming there to see you and taking pictures with you and posting on their social media about their sick friend with cancer. And that's all you ever hear from them, is them showing up to get a photo op with you, posting about it, showing themselves as such a great friend, and then never following up with you, never contacting you, just basically making themselves feel better and then also look better on the internet. So essentially what it is using your illness for their own clout. Another way that this can show up within the cancer community I have seen is that people who shave their heads in solidarity with cancer patients, it's not always a bad thing. For example, my husband, he kept his hair shaved off the whole time I didn't have hair. I didn't see that as a performative action. He wasn't posting it online and filming it and trying to get likes. He was literally doing that for me. And it was something that he asked me about before he did it. And for me, it was comforting. And he continued to shave his head the whole time I was sick. And it wasn't like I was sitting here watching him constantly regrow hair, long hair, and I'm still sitting over here bald. It's a little bit different. But there are people who I've seen online that make a big deal about shaving their heads in solidarity with someone who is sick without ever even talking to them about how they feel about it, and then making a big deal about it online. And, it's those videos you see with, millions and millions of views where the patient is pretty lost in all of it. It's really focused on that person and what a great person they are for doing that. Like I said, shaving your head in solidarity with someone isn't always a bad thing, but you definitely need to assess what your intentions are behind that and why you're doing it. Truly think about that and have a conversation with the person who is sick and see how they feel about it. Because how they feel about it is most important. It doesn't really matter how you feel about it, which is something I have seen online where people will say, hey, I'm uncomfortable with people doing this. And then others who are not in the community will shame them and say, well, how dare you say that? They're just trying to support you. Well, there are other ways to support patients besides shaving your head if that is something you truly want to do. A few years ago, I wrote an article about grief tourism through Cure Today, and I want to read an excerpt of that article, and I think it really illustrates the grief tourist point and what I'm talking about. So before we get into other submissions that I have selected from the community, I just want to read this excerpt of the article. I will also link the article in the show description, so if you'd like to read the whole thing, feel free. But here is the excerpt. I have come to understand that these people were grief tourists, those who do not really care, but are there with buckets of popcorn watching the show. Some are there because they want to feel better about their own lives. Some are there because they want to feel connected to something big. Some are there because they want to portray a certain image. No true grief tourist is there for the person in the middle of the tragedy. Now, this next part I'm going to read, think back to an episode or so ago when we talked about being in the middle of the ocean surrounded by sharks and everyone thinking that's normal. This is kind of in line with that analogy. If you were in the middle of an ocean, a grief tourist would ride by on a boat and snap a picture. A true friend would drag you out of the water and save you. I really wish I understood that my job was not to perform for grief tourists, it was to survive. I had a lot of people come out of the woodwork when I was diagnosed. I had people from high school I hadn't talked to in nearly 10, 15 years that came out and were saying, let me know if you need anything. And I genuinely didn't ask these people for anything. So I guess I'm not calling them grief tourists per se, but their energy was very grief tourist-like. And there have been other people who are in my life that were like a friend of a friend and were supportive online, writing things, gifting me things. And then as soon as I was done with cancer, they unfriended me or ghosted me, whatever. I noticed too when my cancer came back that a lot of these performative grief tourist people disappeared because I guess they had moved on to the next thing. My cancer was old news. They gave me enough support. I don't know what their logic is, but that is something that happens the longer you stay sick. Like people who are dealing with chronic or metastatic cancer, I have heard plenty of times that the longer things go on, the less support you get because people are just moving on with their life, but it's not a luxury that we get to just simply move on. And I would say to you, if you're listening to this and you want to support somebody with cancer, really think about that before you step in. Think about how much support you realistically can give to somebody. Think about setting expectations maybe with yourself and even with the person. Don't offer things that you're not able to follow through with. Make sure that you can do what you say because it does matter. Not to say you can't wish people well or check in on them, but if you are saying, let me know if you need anything, make sure that you truly mean, let me know if you need anything. Don't just say that because there are people out there who will contact you needing rides to treatment, or maybe they need food, or maybe they need help with bills or whatever. Just make sure that you have an intention to follow up with that offer of help. And people most likely won't ask you for things. And so that's another thing. If you do want to support someone, simply writing something like that, it doesn't do anything but shift like the burden onto the person who's already going through a hard time. So let me know if you need anything. Not the best. Let me know if I can bring you dinner on Thursday or Friday. Do you like pizza? Do you like Chinese food? What do you like? I'll drop it off. Specific, actionable things go so much further than these empty, let me know if you need anything comments. And I remember on my YouTube channel, I think I made a video saying one of the worst things you could say to cancer patients was, let me know if you need anything. And people were just flabbergasted by that at the time because a lot of this stuff wasn't mainstream like it is now. These conversations are becoming more mainstream, which is great. I hope that means things are changing. I've seen before where people said, if I had a quarter for every time people said, let me know if you need anything, but that's all it was, I would have plenty of money to get anything I needed. So it does happen. It happens all the time. So just stop and think about that. Doesn't mean you can't check in on people, but if you're offering help, make sure that you intend to follow up on that help and make sure you intend to be there as a support person if you put yourself in that role. I want to go ahead and read the first submission on this grief tourist topic from the community, and it says, the same grief tourist that messaged me at the beginning of treatment is now trying to shill her MLM at me. She messaged me once at the beginning of treatment, nothing in 6 months, and now wants to help me reach her party goal. I guarantee you, if you're listening to this from the cancer community, the MLM thing ran across your mind already before the story even came up, because I have seen that happen on more than one occasion, where people see you as an opportunity to sell whatever they're selling, not only, MLM products, but no matter what it is, or offer you their services, or it's just tacky. Don't do that. It's not helpful. It's not okay. Even if you think that your products are the best thing since sliced bread, if your only form of support to someone is an initial message letting them know how sad you are about their tragic situation, crickets, and then after they're done, you want to talk about these fabulous products for them, no, that is not okay. That is the sheer definition of a grief tourist. And if you are doing things like that, you need to look internally and analyze your priorities in life, because that is not support. That is your own selfish interest, in my opinion. I want to give a few signs to you, besides sharing these stories, of signs that somebody is acting as a grief tourist in your life, because sometimes when you're new to this world especially, it can be hard to understand who is genuinely there for you and who is playing this grief tourist role. I have fallen victim to thinking that people were genuine and they were really in that role. So if that happens or has happened to you, please know that that is not your fault. That is normal. But I think that sharing more of these stories and kind of talking through these things will help you sort that out a little bit. So let's go into that list and kind of talk about a couple different points where I have seen that these particular actions scream grief tourist. One of the major things is very intrusive questions. And it's not just like, hey, how you doing? It's like, hey, what's your prognosis, your life expectancy? When's your hair gonna fall out? How much hair do you have? Like, just very invasive personal questions that you would not expect from that person, because you don't have that type of relationship with them. And the thing is, that person's not thinking or considering your feelings. They're just considering themselves. They want the tea. They want to know what's going on. They're nosy, honestly. And you don't owe people a response. I'm going to tell you that right now. I spent so much of my time texting back every little human being that reached out to me about cancer. And no matter what they asked, I felt like, oh, they asked, so I need to answer. Like, they're giving me their time. They're paying attention to what's going on. They care. Well, the reality is that most people who were in that role in my life, I don't speak to any of them. Like, the people who reached out asking all these questions and saying all these things, where are they now? They ain't here. And I was bending over backwards, making myself sick and traumatizing myself, really, and answering all of these questions when people ask for updates. And I just want to tell you, you do not owe anyone information. No, you get to decide what you share, who you share it with, how you share it. You don't got to share it all. But that is a big, big, big sign that if it's somebody who you're like, WTF, why would they ask me that question? You might have a little red flag on your hands for a grief tourist. Along with that, there is another, it's kind of in the same realm, is unsolicited advice. We all know when you get diagnosed with cancer, there is a lot of unsolicited advice that comes your way. And I've noticed that a lot of it comes from people who play these grief tourist roles. They read something on Facebook, their friend's grandma had this, they saw an article wherever and they want to tell you about it. And so a lot of times these like intrusive questions come along with this unsolicited advice. And if you are giving unsolicited advice to people who are going through cancer and you barely have a relationship with them, what are you doing? You need to kind of reevaluate. It's one thing if somebody asks you for your opinion, or if they, put a blanket thing out like, hey, does anybody know a great oncologist here? Or do you know about this topic? That is inviting it. Or if you're having a really good in-depth conversation with someone and you offer some advice to them, but just like popping out of the woodwork with like, go to the top of a mountain and put crystals on your head and chant 7 times like, I heard that's going to cure your cancer. No, please don't do that. Just don't, please. But that is something that I've noticed that came along with these grief tourist people, was the crazy questions that they should have never asked, and then equally as insane or upsetting suggestions of things I should try or do. And also, you may have also had this happen to you where somebody starts in on, I would never do that if I got cancer. I would never do chemo. I would never do this. I would never do that. When you're sitting here literally getting what they're saying they would never do, like, I would never put that poison in my body. That's not helpful. Not helpful. Nope. Zip. Not helpful. No. In line with these 2 signs, or we'll call them red flags. These red flags, another one that I noticed is people who are very self-absorbed, where, example, I tell you I am sick from my chemotherapy, having a hard time, and then they hit you with the, I didn't get much sleep the other night and I know exactly how you feel. No, you don't. It's like it becomes the suffering Olympics sometimes. And I find that more with the grief tourist, where they are using your life as kind of like a way to make themselves feel better about theirs. Or maybe they're trying to be relatable. I'm not really sure, but it's not the suffering Olympics. And me talking about the hard time I'm having is not an invitation for you to try to like get it or need to tell me this is why you understand. It's fine if it's something that is relatable, but saying like, yeah, I had a cold once. I totally understand how it feels to have stage 4 cancer. I had a cold once. No. And along with that comes some people too who they ask you about your situation to get kind of like an in for your ear, your attention, and then they start talking about their own issues in life and kind of using you as like a quasi-therapist for themselves. Like somehow because you're going through a hard time, suddenly that means that you have more validity in like responding to them, or they feel like you can relate or want to listen. It's like, just because I'm going through a hard time doesn't mean that I am okay with literally everyone coming to me and dumping on me. Like, we need to have mutual respect with people and not just assume that they're in the headspace to even hear that. You ask somebody how they're doing, who's going through this, and then your response back is to immediately jump into your problems and your situations, not in a natural way and like a, oh, that's great. Oh, blah, blah, blah. By the way, let's stop and kind of evaluate what you're doing at that time, because you're not helping that person. It's not a friend telling you, like I talked about in the last episode, tell me about things that are happening in your life. That's not just telling me what's happening in your life. Like, it's like a random, why are you telling me this? I think that's the thing. It's if you think to yourself, why are you telling me this? Red flag. These last 2 are in line with what we've already been talking about, but people who don't respect your boundaries. So if you are already setting boundaries with people, great job. We will talk about that in a little bit. But if you're already doing that and they're not listening to you, or they're dismissing what you're saying, or they're downplaying your feelings, red flag. We need like a real red flag, like red flag. Like, if you're watching the video version, I'm like, we need like a red flag I could throw up maybe. Just know that setting boundaries with these sorts of people, or with anyone in your life, it's valid. It's good to do. It feels like you're in your villain era when you do it sometimes, especially if you're like a recovering people pleaser like I am. It can feel like, oh, I'm not being a good friend, or I'm not being an understanding person. No, you have to put yourself first sometimes. And especially when you're going through something like cancer, it's like the one time where it's like you have the cancer card here, cancer card. I'm going to pull the cancer card out and say, hey, guess what? I'm allowed to say that I don't have space for this right now in my life. So thank you, Sally Sue. I don't want to buy your MLM products. I'm sorry that's happening in your life, but I've told you before, I don't have space for this. No, you don't have to just let all of these people in or give these people any of your precious energy, because when you're going through cancer, you don't have a lot left to give to a lot of people. So focus that energy on the people who matter, your family, your close friends, the people who show up in unexpected ways. I will tell you, a lot of us see that people's true colors shine through bright when you're going through cancer. And there are unexpected people who step up and are really meaning, let me know if you need anything, and are there and are present and want to hear about things. So those people are the ones that I would spend my precious energy connecting with, because it's not all about them. It's truly about wanting to support you in a genuine way. Here is another submission that I wanted to read because I thought it was very Grief Taurus-esque. It says, I was in the McDonald's drive-thru and I recognized the girl at the window from school. Before I had the chance to say anything, she said, oh my God, hi, how are you feeling? I didn't even know her name, but she knew exactly who I was and thought it was appropriate to ask me how I was feeling. Now, I know some of you are going to think, well, that wasn't really that bad that she asked how you're doing. I think it's more that you feel like your privacy has been invaded when you don't even know who this is and they know everything about you, like they're following your story. It can just feel a little bit invasive. I would probably prefer somebody to just say like, hey, I heard you were going through this. How are you? It's the, oh my God, I heard about you. And you're just like, oh, you heard about me. Back to the identity conversation. You feel like you're reduced to like, oh, I'm the cancer girl. I'm the cancer girl everyone's talking about. And it can just feel icky. In line with that submission, I want to read another one from a parent who is a cancer parent. So a parent of a child going through cancer, because it doesn't just happen to the patient themselves. It can happen to the caregivers too. So I want to make sure that that perspective is highlighted here too, because yes, it happens to them. So on this submission, there is a text and it is from the cancer muggle to the cancer parent. And it says, I'm overstepping for sure. However, I don't care. Why is she not going to the Cleveland Clinic or Roswell Park? And what this parent wrote to me is, a mom from my kid's preschool 20 years ago, haven't seen or talked to her since then, reached out to me at 11:54 p.m. on a Sunday via Facebook Messenger, sending strength, hugs, love, support, etc. to our family dealing with my daughter's cancer diagnosis / treatment / journey. She followed up with this on Monday. At least I'm polite and said please. Blocked and WTF. So I'll tell you what her response was. Yes, you are overstepping. We call people like you cancer muggles. Google that. Please F off. For me, the fact that that person thought it was appropriate 20-something years later to reach out to a parent to criticize them about what their child is doing for their treatment. Like, even just imagine being a parent of a child with cancer and then having some nobody from 20 years ago find you on Facebook Messenger and start criticizing what you're doing. That is unacceptable. That is the epitome of this sort of behavior that we're talking about. Crossing boundaries, invasive questions, just nastiness, really. No, not okay. Well, now that we've firmly established some red flags on Grief Taurus and heard some stories, I want to talk about a few ways that you can combat these sorts of people. What can you do about it? What has worked for me? And hopefully these will help if you are facing those same sorts of situations. Number one is setting boundaries, as we've discussed. Setting boundaries with people and letting them know that their questions or their approach is not acceptable is important. It's hard. It is not easy, believe me. Like I said, I'm a recovering people pleaser, and I've learned through therapy how to set boundaries and to understand that setting boundaries is healthy and it's needed, especially when you're going through something like this. This is kind of like your whole world explodes, especially when you go public with your diagnosis. Everybody wants to reach out and see what's going on and ask questions and blah, blah, blah. And if you start from the beginning of your experience and set firm boundaries, it can really make a huge difference. Now, if you're like me and you didn't do that, you can still do it. So you can still say, hey, Bob, I'm not comfortable talking about that anymore. Or can we move on to a different subject? Or just don't even write back. You do not have to write people back. I know that I've told you I spent so much time writing people back, every person that asked me, and I regret it. I truly do regret it because I wish I just spent more time focusing on my family, on my own mental health, and not worrying about keeping up some sort of quasi-weird relationship with people who really didn't even care. I want to share one story with you from my own experience that kind of illustrated this point to me very clearly. So when I was going through treatment the first time, there was a person that I worked with that, checked in on me quite often, asked me these questions, let me know if you need anything, all of that, and begged me to come eat lunch with them near where they worked, and said that they just really missed me and cared about me. And so there was a time that I felt okay in between treatments. And that's sometimes very rare, where like 1 or 2 days you feel good and then you go back into treatment. So I finally said, okay. And I drove nearly 45 minutes to where this was to meet this person. And I was in the parking lot of the restaurant and I was like, hey, I'm here. And lo and behold, they text me and said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm too busy. I'm really, really sorry. It was like a slap in the face, truly. I was like, wow, I spent like my one good day to drive 45 minutes both ways, because I obviously had to go home after that. And you pretended to care about me so much that you just don't even show up. And it wasn't because they had a tragedy happen in their life or, something understandable. It's just like, oh, I'm just too busy. That I was flabbergasted, truly. And the one good thing about that experience was it opened my eyes, but then also my friend Brandon, he was literally on vacation and he came over and ate lunch with me. So thank you, Brandon. If you ever hear this, that meant a lot to me. And it showed me the difference between a performative grief tourist and a real friend. In line with this sort of putting yourself first, setting boundaries is focusing on, as I said, yourself and what your needs are. So you don't have to accommodate people wanting to visit or see you. No matter how much they pressure you into showing up at that restaurant, you don't owe that to them. You don't owe people anything when it comes to this experience. You don't owe them your answers. You don't owe them your time. You don't owe them anything. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach to going through cancer. And so even if people say that you're rude or, oh, how dare you, I invited you, or this and that, okay, it's fine. They can think what they think. But you need to truly take care of yourself, protect yourself, and not worry about what Sally Sue from high school thinks, because she doesn't matter in the long run. You're going through cancer. You're literally fighting for your life. You're trying to survive. Put the important people and the important things to you first. Not what everyone else says is important. It matters what you think is important. And that is all that matters, really. So sometimes we encounter these people out in just like everyday life. Like maybe you come across Sally Sue in the grocery store. And it's not like you just can't reply. You're there actually in person being asked these things. And yes, you can still assert your boundaries in person. You can also work on just like shortening the conversation or making your responses very short and not expanding upon them. So if somebody says, oh, how are you doing? How's treatment? That's okay. That's it. It's like, It's okay. It's pretty good. It's fine. Not good, but it's fine. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't need to expand upon it. You're still answering back. You're not, completely just being like, who are you, Sally? So I don't say yeah. I mean, you could do that if you want, but, you're just kind of answering it in a way that shows the person, like, I'm not interested in this conversation. Okay. I'm good. Mm-hmm. Move on down the road. You can also redirect the conversation to something else, like themselves. I've done that before. People love talking about themselves. So you could just be like, I'm good. How are you? How's Bobby's soccer game? Blah, blah, blah. Obviously, even with grief tourists, they like to talk about themselves a lot of times. And so redirecting the conversation, keeping it short, making sure there's nothing really interesting that you're saying about your situation, because that's what they're just looking for, something to say, like, oh, I saw her at the store today and she said that she was so sick from chemo. I'm good. And you? It doesn't give them much to talk about. And that's the point. One major thing that can help combat this sort of grief tourist situation is how much of your cancer experience you put online. Now, it's personal preference for people whether or not they want to share about their experiences. But I will say that once you do share about it online, I think that's where a lot of this behavior comes from. And so that is something that I just want you to think about before you go into sharing, is like, how much am I wanting the average Joe to know about what's going on with me, and realizing that this phenomena will come on. There will people that come out of nowhere. So think about it. Like, does the good outweigh the bad? Do you want to do this? Do you only want to share with a certain number of people? And just kind of thinking that through. And you can be the most chronic oversharer online, hello me, and then also decide that that's not right for you anymore. You get to decide. So really being cognizant of what you do share and with who, and knowing that, hey, if I do want to share about this emotion, then I might get this back. And if you're prepared and you've set boundaries and you're okay with, dealing with these people, that's okay. But, for me, like I said in the beginning, I was not equipped to deal with these people. I was sharing about my experience, but it came with some good things, but it mainly came with bad things, honestly. It came with a lot of, sympathy stares, weird people reaching out, expectations that I didn't want of, like, being brave or strong. And I know this sounds insane because I'm talking about cancer on a podcast, but if I could go back all the way back to the beginning, I would probably tell myself not to share about it online. I would have kept it pretty private. And I know people who keep everything really private while they're going through it. And then when they're done with their treatments, if they can be done, obviously, like I've told you, not everyone finishes treatment, but if they are able to be done, then that is when they kind of share in, like, the after. And I think whenever you choose to share, or however you choose to do it, or even if you don't, that is your personal and private decision. Nobody else gets to say what you do and don't do, especially when it comes to something like your illness. That is so personal, and nobody's opinion should really matter except for yours. But just understanding that the more you put out there, the more that you're going to get this sort of behavior back. So maybe you're prepared to deal with it. Or if you're not prepared to deal with it and you don't want all of this attention, maybe just thinking that through and kind of limiting who you do share it with, safe friends, safe family members, people who are genuine about why they're interested in hearing these updates and aren't there to just, like, report back to the 5 o'clock news. You know what I mean? The last one I want to talk through is something I've mentioned in 1 or 2 episodes, is that seeking out people who understand what you're going through, as far as an online community, an in-person support group, whatever might be your vibe, that is something that can really help you deal with these experiences that we have, because it normalizes it. It doesn't make it okay. I don't think that people, like that person who wrote to that mom, I don't think that they're okay at all. I think that they're way out of line. But the fact that maybe you share that experience and then another person says, oh, that happened to me, it doesn't make it okay, but it makes it easier to cope with that situation, to understand that you're not alone in it, and to kind of commiserate. Like, it's kind of like when you're working somewhere and it's not the greatest place to work, but your coworkers become like your really good friends because you're bonding over all the terrible things that happen there. That's kind of what goes on in the cancer community. So it doesn't make it okay, but knowing that there's people out there who have gone through the same thing. It's not just you. You're not alone in what's going on. It happens. It's normal, quote unquote, normal to have these sort of things happen. It can just help you feel better about the situation. It doesn't fix it. It doesn't make it okay, but it just makes you feel a little bit better knowing that you're not alone. I hope this episode has helped you not feel so alone with these situations, understand how to identify these sorts of people in your life, and also have a plan as to how you are going to cope when these conversations pop up. I know that it's been a long, long, long time of figuring things out on my end, and I'm still figuring things out. So we'll figure it out together. All right, guys, I think that pretty much wraps up this episode of the Tough Friends Collective. I hope that you found it helpful, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.